The North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association needs your help to shine a light on hospitality industry stars.
Even in these extraordinary times, restaurants and hotels are brimming with outstanding leaders who are raising the bar for excellence in performance, service, and the commitment to the industry. NCRLA's Stars of the Industry event recognizes the brightest stars.
Who do you know that has really made an impression going above and beyond?
After the challenging year we've experienced, it's more important than ever to honor and celebrate those who have persevered and made a difference for their company, their employees, their teammates, and the industry. So nominate a star at ncrla.org/stars.
The deadline to submit a nomination is December 11th.
And save the date for an exciting virtual awards ceremony hosted by yours truly,
Max and Matt of the NCF&B podcast
on February 16th. Get the details at ncrla.org/stars.
You are listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Coming to you virtually live from high atop the historic Raleigh building in beautiful downtown Raleigh. The NCF&B takes the listener behind the scenes to tell the stories of the people that contribute to the creation of the food and beverage community of North Carolina. And now, the misfits in the dish pit, the faces of the front. They are Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And today, we are honored by the presence of perhaps, I'm going to say is, the next great American author. And I'm just going to coin this right here, Max. I don't know if this has been talked about.
Okay.
But I'm going to say the modern day Mark Twain.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Jesus Christ.
Throw Hemingway in there, too, like they were roommates. If Hemingway and Twain had a baby boy, and if that was actually genetically possible.
It would be Wright Thompson, who's joining us today, the author of this newly released book that all of you are going to be intrigued by, Pappy Land.
Yeah, Pappy Land, a story of family, fine bourbon, and the things that last.
That's right.
Welcome, Wright. How you doing?
Well, I mean, now I can't possibly live up to that introduction. So
Yeah.
So the interview's over.
I'm good.
We're done.
Yeah, entertain us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as the new Mark Twain, I don't talk to the media, so have a great day.
But you're the modern Mark Twain, so of course, so you do like social media and everything.
Oh, you're right. My bad.
Well, I had to throw Ernest Hemingway in there, too, just because Ernest loved to drink. He even has his own cocktail named after him, a fine daiquiri. I bring that up, too, because many people would probably originally know of Wright Thompson would be more from the sports world as a senior writer for ESPN, and then many fantastic things you've written. But then you just go out and throw out a book about the most famed whiskey family and whiskey production. Obviously, we're giving props to Pappy Van Winkle. I watched you on Scott Van Pelt after, I think it was like Monday Night Football, and I just was like, oh, man. This guy is he's speaking my language in so many different ways. He loves all this sports. He loves this bourbon. Just a family man, a good writer.
Yeah.
And so we just connected on social media as a good modern day Mark Twain would do. And
That's right.
And here we are. We're talking about this. You're a senior sports writer for ESPN. I wanted to start at least with this because I think maybe it will help explain a little bit of what you do. One of my good friends, Penn Holderness, he did work inside of the ABC family for a little bit, and I helped produce his podcast with his lovely wife, Kim. I told him you were going to be on the show, and so he immediately texted me your piece from Outside the Lines, Michael Jordan Has Not Left the Building, and he said, if you love MJ, you read this. And I did, and I do, and I was blown away. I think it's a great piece, but I'm more curious about your process, and so if you could use this piece as an example, maybe shed light on and how you build stories and how you might have built the story with Michael Jordan in general, just to kind of frame out what you do.
Well, I mean, my whole gig is spending lots of time with, in my case, athletes without sort of their agents managing it. I mean, a lot of these profiles you read, you just can tell, like, I'm getting sold a bill of goods. Do you know what I mean? Like, clearly the agent is somehow involved in this. And, like, I take my relationship. I mean, this is going to sound hokey, but I take the relationship with the reader very seriously. And my responsibility is not to Michael Jordan, and it's not to their agents or William Morris Endeavor or CAA or my responsibility is to the reader. And so I start from there. Like I want, to the best of my ability, for each of these things to be a letter from inside someone's life that is unvarnished and completely true. And like, that doesn't mean they can't evolve and change. You know, I don't pretend for these stories to be like, this is who this person is, bold, all capital letters forever. Right. I mean, you know, this is a story about what it was like to be around Michael Jordan as he was considering turning 50. It's not about Michael Jordan before. It's not about Michael Jordan now. And I think that if you do that, you know, people come back because they know that you're not bullshitting them. You know, that like, I guess I start there. And, you know, with Michael, I read this story in the New Yorker. It's funny how writing sort of prompts writing. But I read this story in the New Yorker about Paul McCartney turning 64. And it was sort of this cute story, like, when I'm 64, you know, Paul McCartney wrote that song.
Yeah.
Yeah, and tried to imagine the oldest he could possibly imagine a human being when he was 19 or whatever, and it was 64, and then he was 64. And I just was like, well, that's really interesting, because, like, what do you do when you used to be a Beatle, you know? And so that was true. What do you do when you used to be Michael Jordan? And so that's where the story, I mean, really the story is, it's as simple as that. And then, you know, that's basically it.
You know, that's a great place to jump into Pappy Land, because this is a story about bourbon for sure, but it's really like the title says, or the subtitle says, a story about family. And when you think about Julian Van Winkle III, who you spent a lot of time with in writing this book, and you think about that his life or success and fame really began in his third act, almost as you write in the book. And you know, what I'm wondering is when you wrote that book and you spent all this time with Julian, and then juxtapose coming off the Cost of These Dreams, your New York Times bestseller, was there a lot of parallels between guys like Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, and Julian Van Winkle III?
Well, Julian is a lot more normal.
Well, that's interesting.
And yet, it was interesting to me that continuing to keep the old Rip Van Winkle label alive from the time he took over after his father's sort of sudden relatively young death. I mean, you got from 1981 to say 1997, when that 20-year-old got that 99 score, no one wanted this stuff.
Right.
Like, yeah. I mean, you know, so that is 16 years of borrowing money, and every single year having to, like, you know, every single jackass who wanted to bottle vodka for their country club, you know, Julian was bottling for them to try to keep the bottling plant open to fund the whiskey business. I mean, there's still people who owe him money who just never paid their bills. Like, every year was a struggle to just put this whiskey out in the world that was then collecting dust in liquor store shelves, because no one wanted it. I mean, no one wanted it to the point that Stitzel Weller bourbon was 2% of the Crown Royal blend.
Yeah.
Like, they were putting this stuff in trucks and shipping it to Canada.
Yeah.
No one wanted it. He couldn't borrow money.
Yeah. Like, not even banks would touch him.
No, banks would, like, he couldn't borrow the money.
There's a quote in your book. I had a chance to delve deep into it. To say that I completely read the entire book would be false, and I only apologize because
just lie to me.
I am a horrible reader, but I will say this: I found that Chris Abernathy does the narrative audiobook on Audible, and I used it as a companion piece with the book. And there's a part. Pappy's company motto: we make fine bourbon at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always fine bourbon. And that comes up a few times in the book, that Julian III was not, as contrary to like what most people would think, is not like rolling in the dough, and had some really severe financial problems throughout this time, yet still producing what America knows is like the best bourbon out there. That's an interesting struggle. Makes me think like, and I know that it's covered in the book a little bit, but with the black market and like everybody raising the prices of Pappy, like why don't they just charge more and make more money?
He doesn't think. I mean, this sounds overly simple, but this is how they think of it. He has them priced at what he thinks they're worth. What's so interesting is guys like this live the long game. And so while like folks like me and guys like you are like, Pappy Van Winkle is the hottest thing in the world, they are suspicious of fads. They are suspicious of booms. They know that rise always comes with fall. So these things are priced so that if all of a sudden everyone in the world stopped drinking bourbon, they wouldn't have boxed out their loyal customers who will get them through the lean times. We all just assume that bourbon is going to boom and boom forever, but nothing does that. And the history of bourbon is pretty clear that this stuff goes in cycles. And so one of the things that they're trying to do is make sure that there is a Ole Van Winkle distillery in 2 generations and in 3 generations. And so they play the long game. And, it's interesting in the context of the book because, I work for a cable news network. I'm the opposite of the long game. And so it was really, intoxicating. It was really seductive to be around because you start to think, well, maybe I could live like that because they just don't rise and fall with the bullshit. They just they are playing a long arc and it's sort of relaxing to be around. Julian's putting stuff in barrels right now that he won't ever live to see bottled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they just think about this stuff differently than we think about it.
I'm sure people who are listening, and as you've well mentioned, that bourbon aficionados, they are incredibly knowledgeable, and it's intimidating, especially I can imagine when you're writing a book about it, because they're going to call you out on anything. When the family lost the Stitzel Weller distillery that was so famously the original for Pappy Van Winkle, what was in his father's mind? That's not playing the long game, is it? I know it was a hard time, but how deep did he get into that with you and kind of, describe what was going on there?
Well, they lost it. One, I think he learned that you need to have total control because, he had family members who were also business partners who weren't willing to wait. Think about how much money they would all have if they would have, this was happening, say the sale was 1972. Mm-hmm. Think if they could have just hunkered down and made it 20 years. They'd all have airplanes. Right. Julian's dad was in favor of playing the long game, and his business partners, one of whom happened to be his sister, wanted their money now. And so they cashed out, and they made a little bit of money when if they would have just hung in for 20 years, they could have made an incredible amount of money. And so, Julian's dad lost the distillery not because he was making bad business decisions, but because he had partners who couldn't play the long game. And so, everything that was happening,
maybe his sister would be really good to work for ESPN.
Really, what's the hot take? What's the hot take now? We get Julian's sister and me and Stephen A, and we can yell about the Cowboys.
But first, I do want to speak about the Folks Foundation, who is a fantastic sponsor of our podcast and champions of all good things crafted in North Carolina and the folks that make them. So you can support the Folks Foundation by going to folksfoundation.org, where you can read more and read their journal online, the Folks Journal. They're doing fantastic things, whether they're supporting podcasters or farmers, crafters, musicians. All of that can be found at folksfoundation.org.
Do you think that Julian had any resentment, or it sounds like from your understanding that he completely understands the position that his father was in at that time?
Julian is pretty good about, Julian doesn't carry a bunch of stuff around like I do.
Yeah.
Julian's pretty good about, he doesn't have resentment toward his father or his aunt.
You say he has the inability to reflect, but I guess that's what makes him such a great host and gregarious person.
Well, it's interesting. He understands where everyone was coming from. His sister wasn't wrong. She just wanted money and his dad wanted to be in the whiskey business.
Right.
And if you want to be in the whiskey business, that means playing a long game. And if you're an investor, that, those are two very different things.
Right.
Do you want to make fine whiskey, or is this an investment?
Yeah.
And it's a foolish investment for a lot of people because they're not in it for the money. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the Van Winkle finances, but, they have turned down incredible amounts of money that I don't think I would be able to turn down. I mean, incredible amounts. Like your grandkids don't have to work amounts of money.
Yeah. Life-changing, generational changing.
10 figures, 11 figures. You know what I mean?
Nuts.
Like big numbers.
Yeah.
And I just want to also mention that, by the way, for those of you who are, it's not just a personal story, because you weave so fantastically the story and history of bourbon and how Kentucky came to be and why wheat and corn became the staples of bourbon so magically in the book. So just for those of you listening, it's not only about a dramatic and tugging at the heartstrings book. There's a lot of great bourbon anecdotes as well.
Yeah, I think like chapter 8 of this first section is like so deep into the lore of whiskey and how it's created. I'm like, oh, I need to just send anybody that wants to know anything about whiskey just like that one chapter, and they'll figure out so much from how you so eloquently wrote it. And also how your wife said it. You said it on Scott Van Pelt's show that your wife basically said, "Oh, so you wrote Eat, Pray, Love for Dads."
Oh, dude. I mean, just the amount of shit I get. It's like, yeah. No, she was like, oh. She's also, I wrote this story about how all these lives of people affected by Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans were sort of intersecting with each other on the 10-year anniversary of it. And she was like, you wrote Love Actually about Katrina. And I was like, damn it. Yes, that's exactly
You're
right.
a romantic at heart.
Oh, there you go. I'm serving up manly rom-coms.
Well, so that's something that I do kind of want to let our listeners know that are curious about reading this book too. As Matt said, you're going to learn a lot about whiskey as well as learning the lore of the family. Pappyland does center around the Van Winkle family, but you also weave a lot of moments of your own life, somewhat as like a comparison or even perspective, such as like your wife's pregnancy. I don't want to give away a bunch of things, but like the struggles that had come from that. And then being that Pappyland is much about generations of father to son, your own connection with your father, kind of, at least for me, really helped me like connect. But it was very relatable in a sense to watch this and realize that this is just a story about a family unlike many others. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit more, just how you decided to bring a lot of your own personal self into the book.
Well, I kept going up there and sitting with him, and I kept finding that the parts of the conversations that were, as meaningful or frankly more meaningful to me than the conversations about bourbon were all the conversations we were having, about life, his life, my life. And it started to bug me that the most interesting and poignant version of the experience of hanging out with Julian Van Winkle would be one that lived in my head and not on the page. And so ultimately I just was like, I need to just write about the 4 years I spent with him. You know what I mean? Like, it needs to, on some level, just be a buddy movie. Because, I just can't put a book out in the world and then go talk about it nonstop and just say, yeah, but you really should have been with us. You can't do a book that is, based on you just had to be there. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, that's just a huge fail. And so, it was sort of just survival of structuring it like this. I just couldn't think of another way to do it. It wasn't like, I had 4 or 5 great ideas and let's pick the most effective. It just was the only thing I could think of that worked.
Speaking about your personal life, in the book you say, or Julian admits that he was not the disciplinarian for his children. Who's the disciplinarian in your family? I know you have a 2.5-year-old and a newborn, but who lays down the law?
Oh, my wife for sure. Look, their love is for sale and I want it. To quote the West Wing. And no, I'm a total sucker.
Yeah, my 4-year-old said to me the other day, I hate mommy. And of course he doesn't, but that, which just means, like, oh, I'm the softie. That's actually what he's saying, like, Daddy, I can manipulate you better.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Whatever.
Okay, now here we go. Now this is really the important question. Okay, so your family, and you're born right outside of Oxford, Mississippi. So by blood, you're an Ole Miss fan. You went to University of Missouri. I'm just wondering, in that scenario, who rightfully should be the Denver Broncos quarterback? Should it be Chad Kelly or should it be Drew Lock?
Oh, dude. God, Chad Kelly, man. Swag Kelly gives no fucks. No, I am the proud owner that someone gave me of a Swag Kelly Denver Broncos jersey.
Yeah. And you wear that?
No, like I am 100% Swag Kelly all the way.
Well, as the resident Raider fan in the room, I kind of liked it when the Broncos just elected to not have a quarterback for a weekend. That was pretty cool.
I could have been the quarterback. No, but
no, that's the best.
Yeah.
By the way, I just pulled up Chad Kelly's Instagram, and it says followed by the Oxford Police. That's on brand.
That's perfect.
Fantastic.
Okay, but getting serious for a second, Eli Manning is the best quarterback ever from Ole Miss. I mean, that goes without saying, right?
I would say Archie Manning is.
You're going to say Archie, but that's because you also wrote a piece on him recently. I mean, come on. It's all about recent memory.
Yeah, but I mean, are you a Giants fan?
Oh, yeah. The first place New York Giants, please.
Well, I mean, yeah, but by the way, I mean, who do you want leading you into the playoffs? Would you rather have your current situation, or would you rather go find Eli by the swimming pool and be like, hey, man, can you play a couple more games? Like, who do you want on that drive? I'm really asking. I mean, do you want Eli Manning, even though he hasn't touched a football in a year, or do you want Matt Jones?
I want Daniel Jones right now. I'm going to say it. I think if he doesn't make any turnovers.
Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
I didn't even know his name.
That's all right. You put my name. You projected my name onto him, which is accurate. Yeah.
Matt Jones was the
receiver quarterback
for the
Arkansas.
Jaguars.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to the book, though. I actually want to bring it down to like a real more solemn moment, because you bring up your father and your connection to your own father with almost like the connection of going back to Pappy Van Winkle, Julian Van. Well, they're all Julian, so it's like Julian to Julian to Julian. But you bring up your father a lot.
It's really confusing. Yeah.
But I bring up your father because you wrote, and I know you've probably told this story a million times, so we don't have to go way down it. But you wrote Holy Ground on Father's Day or near Father's Day. Gosh, it's over a decade ago, I think, since you've written this piece.
Yeah.
Which was a connection to your own father, who held the Masters in such high regard. Not to get all into my own personal business, but I recently found out that my father had died. And I say it that way because I didn't really know him at all. I had zero contact with him for most of my life. But reading this beautifully written story about your dad, filled with so much regret, it really connected to me. It's like, it's all about the passing of generations, the finality of death, and that is unfortunately relatable to everybody. But you captured your thoughts so well. And so even for like a guy like me that has zero fatherly connection, I mean, I do have father figures that I grew up with in my life, but directly, you really connected a way for the reader to go, oh, that's what a father-son relationship is like. And it really is like some of the most fantastic writing I've read. I actually read that one too. I didn't listen to it. I read all the words. So I appreciate it. I know you get this comes up a lot. Do you realize that this will probably be like one of the most important pieces that you'll ever have written for your whole life, no matter what, because of the content?
It's still the only thing people come up to me in airports about. I mean, if someone is coming up to me in an airport, it is almost 100% that it's going to be that story.
Yeah.
Which, as a side note, means that they're so vulnerable in what they're going to tell you that you can't just be a jackass. You know what I mean? Like if somebody's coming up to talk about that story, they have a story to tell. And you can't just be like, so it's interesting. I've had a lot of really great conversations, and I'm really glad when people do it. Because, I've heard all sorts of incredible stories about people's reaction to that piece. So one, it 100% will be the only thing anyone remembers. And two, awesome.
Yeah, why not, right? By the way, this is a random thing. Do you know that the year that you were born will be the age of your mother when you are the age of the year she was born. Does that make sense? So put it in this perspective. My mom was born in 1943, and I'm 43 now. I was born in 77, and my mom is 77.
Oh, wow.
So
Is that always the case?
That's always the case.
Huh.
When it goes into a weird number like
That's
12.
exactly the same as me.
Yeah, it's
but I'm
exact
not
same for
43 yet. I'll be 43 in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Back to this story, and what's your go-to bourbon?
Honestly, I mean, bourbons are so expensive now. Bourbons are so expensive now that, like, I mean, Maker's Mark probably.
Okay.
I mean, I just am not. I was talking about this with someone last night. I'm just not into, like, the whole allocation game. Like, if I can't go in and buy it on a shelf anytime I want it, it's not my bourbon.
Sure.
And so, like, people ask all the time, like, we're getting a bourbon for someone's, we're getting a bottle for someone's wedding or bachelor party, or we're chipping in. What should we do? And I'm like, honestly, go buy a really nice crystal decanter with their initials on it, and then get a bottle of Maker's Mark or Wild Turkey.
Right. Because then you can have that all the time.
Call it a day. Like, I'm just not. Yeah, if I can't buy it whenever I want it, then I just don't have time for it. Like, I don't think the amount that it's different, the amount that it's better, makes up for how annoyed I get that I can't find
right.
it.
So isn't that irony? I mean, in the fact that when you're hanging out with Julian, obviously he has the Fort Knox of bourbon. I mean, and he probably doesn't even have that much from what you say in the book, but he's always carrying around Weller. But even that is hard to get. You can't get it all the time. So how does what does he say about that? I want a bourbon that's great that I can drink all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think all he wants is to be able to have enough old Rip Van Winkle out in the world, the 10-year-old, that every single person can keep it in their decanter, and then you have a bottle of 15, 20, or 23 for special occasions. I also don't think he sees those as sort of steps up from each other. I think they're three very, very different high-end aged bourbons for three totally different people. I mean, like, it's not like, 15, then you graduate to 20, then you graduate to 23. I mean, I think different people like different stuff. He likes the 15 the most. I think I do too, although I really like the 20. I think that's how he imagines bourbon should be. Everybody can drink Old Rip every day, and then for special occasions, you'll pull out your bottle of Pappy.
Okay. And I guess it makes sense now that, like he's working with the Buffalo Trace distillery, because in a sense, like, you can drink Buffalo Trace every day. Like, you can get that on the shelves every day. So maybe then that's your okay, that's my go-to. I can get it every day.
Yeah. You said you spent 4 years with Julian. Now, it's not like you just set up a shop in his guest room.
No, I was doing a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah. So how did that schedule work, and like how often over those 4 years were you engaged with him?
I mean, I just sort of was like, one, I would just pop in and out of Louisville when I could, and two, I mean, a lot of it was just around my ESPN schedule. If there was nothing going on for 48 hours, I'd go to Louisville, and then there were some big tentpole events in the whiskey calendar that I wanted to. Like, I wanted to go to a whiskey festival with him. And so stuff like that, I would schedule around that and go with him.
Yeah, and going to Churchill Downs as the book opens is a great place to be. I can't think of a better dude to want to hang out with at Churchill Downs watching the Derby. Like, that's kind of got to be quintessential Kentucky right there. That's pretty cool.
No, it was pretty fun. I've also been courtside to a University of Kentucky basketball game with him. So that's pretty Kentucky too.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit because this is also prescient in the time. We're going to release this episode this week. So you also have an episode of a television show called True South and featuring Brownsville. It's going to come out today, December 10th, on the SEC Network, which you can access via the ESPN app. I've been watching some of the past episodes. You're doing this with John T. Edge, which, if going back into food, if anybody knows and remembers that name, John T. Edge, of course, he wrote the Potlicker papers. He's a 4-time James Beard Award winner. He's the host. You do frequent the episodes, though. Like I did watch the one with Oxford, which is your hometown, and you and John live, 12 blocks away from each other, as it was?
We live 12 blocks apart, and there's a bar that's exactly between us. So
nice.
That's nice and convenient.
He's my friend and neighbor, and yeah, exactly. The Office. I love making the show.
Yeah, I was saying that, so the show, True South, is more of an exploration of the food of the South and the culture. But obviously, given these new times in 2020, your content had to shift completely to discuss what's going on right now. And it from earlier, as you mentioned, about how Julian's family, to kind of tie it together, that nothing lasts forever. And if you have this kind of idea of like a boom or a hot streak, then maybe you'll miss the mark. And no one could have foreseen that all restaurants were just going to shut down and then very few could reopen. I want to know, talking about it, you do get into it in the Oxford episode about the restaurant industry, but what's your opinion about independent restaurants? And I say that more specifically because corporate restaurants I'm not too concerned about, but independent restaurants in the industry, and how do you think it will rebound in 2021, if that's a thing? Is it dead as we know it? Does it have to rise as something new? What are your opinions of that?
The middle is getting crushed. I think there are people, we have 2 restaurants in Brownsville, Tennessee, that is our next episode, and their business is booming. One of them is a fish market that just sells buffalo and cats that are caught out of the Reelfoot Lake. That's cheaper per pound than hamburger meat or pork, which have been skyrocketing during COVID.
Yeah.
It's never great to be poor in America. This has been one of the hardest times for people, and a lot of us, are insulated from that and don't really realize. But we're talking, people can get buffalo and cat for $3 a pound. That's a life changer. So Larry Davis, his fish market in Brownsville, Tennessee, is booming. Helen Turner's barbecue, her business is mostly takeout, so she's killing it. And then at the top end, you have people who are very successful, who are really struggling, but they also have access to capital. They're people with reputations who have investors who, the investors are betting on playing the long game and don't want to it's better to throw a little money to keep something afloat than just burn your entire investment. So they're going to struggle, but they're going to be okay. But the folks in the middle who, aren't serving, those people are getting crushed. And I don't know, we're going to lose a lot of places, and I don't even think we know. So I spent a lot of time in Montana. We have land up in Clyde Park, and we're in Livingston a lot. And this great bar steakhouse called the Stockman, which was in Livingston, which was just a place for ranch hands, really. They had prime rib on Friday and Saturday night, and, just a locals bar, where the local alcoholics can sit in there and almost drink for free. And, it just was a local blue-collar cowboy bar, like a real cowboy bar. They closed during COVID. And I only know that because I talk to people in Livingston all the time. The number of places that we've lost that we haven't even really realized is going to be staggering as we sort of climb out from under this.
Yeah, but I do wanted to make sure that people were aware of your show. True South it's pretty fantastic, and just the conversations that you and John get into are interesting, which begs the question. I guess it just stems from the fact that you're a good boy from the South, that you love food as much as you love sports. But how did you just pivot and say, yeah, I'm going to be on my 3rd season of a show that has nothing really specifically to do with sports, and really just this is more about food and culture, and we're going to put it out on the SEC network, which is basically a branch of ESPN. So how did that even come together? How did you convince the execs up top, this is what I want to do, and trust me?
Well, I hate to blow up the myth of it, but they actually asked me.
Oh, great.
The Rosalind Durant was, she's now Grand Poobah at Walt Disney World. So, Roz, I'm never paying for a park ticket if you're listening. But she came to us. and said, can you develop this? And so I went to John T. and said, help. And so that's how it started. My role in this is, I'm Chris Paul in this, and John T.'s Kobe.
Nice.
I'm just dishing.
Nice.
So, this is the most fun thing I do. We travel around and eat.
I have to ask you about that, like ESPN politics, because you're a Southern guy, a Southern boy, and ESPN, like as Dan Patrick loves to call it, the mothership is this like northeastern, very, I don't know, would you call it conservative or standard bearer of things? Like, how did that relationship work, especially early on?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's actually true. I mean, a lot of my bosses are from the South, or people from all over. And
okay.
I also don't think that, I don't really think that people from the South like food more than, I don't think people from the South like barbecue more than fourth generation folks from the Bronx like pizza, or fifth generation people from Hawaii like ahi and eggs for breakfast. I just don't. I think that's one of those things that I just don't think is true. I don't think Alabama football matters to more from people in Alabama than the Washington Huskies matter to lifelong Huskies fans. I mean, there might be more of them, but I don't, I sort of think that we like to look for regional differences that probably aren't true.
Juxtaposed to that, and I think that people don't maybe enjoy their food, but I think that people from the South or agricultural areas where you can be more local, and this is my perspective as a Northerner coming to the South, have more of a connection to the land where their food comes from, which might make it essentially a deeper connection.
I mean, I think that used to be true. I don't think that's true anymore. I mean, the people in the South who, I feel like the rise of the styrofoam cup that says sweet tea, y'all, is a new thing.
Yeah.
They're my grandmother, who's the most Southern person I know, would never have thought to do that and would think it was absurd. I think those sort of superficial Southernisms are a response to losing connection to land. I mean, not that long ago, everyone either had a personal connection to land or their families did and was on it. And almost no one does now. I mean, there's really no difference between suburban Kansas City and suburban Charlotte.
I mean,
there's
an homogenation, But that's a great point to jump back into the bourbon conversation, because what you realize in this book, and it's funny, and I have a question for you about that, is the rise of rye whiskey again. But as you point out in the book, that rye was a big thing because it was a crop that grew prodigiously in New York and Pennsylvania, where early settlers were, and then as they moved west to Kentucky for political and tax reasons, there was corn and wheat there. But now there's this. I mean, it goes along with what you're saying. Now there's this move back in this taste for rye. So why is that? Is that nostalgia that we want rye, or because we like the spiciness that it actually adds to our whiskey?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think, one, it's probably marketing. Two, it's probably, I can't get Willet bourbon, but I can always get that Willet rye, which is $65 a bottle and is awesome and makes the greatest old fashioned ever. I mean, if I'm going in a liquor store and it's, I can't get one of those bourbons, but I can get, I think this year, maybe, and probably next year, you'll be able to get Van Winkle rye on the shelf, and that 13-year-old rye, and it is awesome. I mean, I would have a Van Winkle rye old fashioned every single day at 5:30 on the dot. And so, I think some of it is that, some of it is sort of the runoff. You go in the liquor store, and the best thing, NFL GMs say you don't draft to fill holes on your team, you draft the best available player. I don't know if I believe that, but I sort of think you go in the liquor store to get bourbon, and there's nothing in there that is sexy, and so, but there's really good rye available sitting on the shelf. I mean, you can go buy a bottle of that Willet rye in every single liquor store in America for $65. And, that's awesome. That's what, when you do the math, what's that, $2 a drink?
Yeah. Well, that's like the other things
that'll make 30 old fashions.
Yeah. That's right. That's like the other thing NFL GMs say about quarterbacks. The best ability is availability.
Yeah. I mean, the thing the NFL GMs don't, it's so funny to me that, like, you saw it with both Manning brothers, but you see it over and over. They don't understand that. I think there's only been one Hall of Fame coach who didn't coach a Hall of Fame quarterback. Like, all of this is a myth. The myth of the coach, the myth of the general manager, the myth of the architect of the team. Either you get lucky and get a Hall of Fame quarterback, or more than likely you suck. And, like, I mean, that there are teams where that's not true. I mean, those great Ravens defenses. Look, there are 1,000 specific examples that sort of prove that isn't always true, but it's mostly true. So the idea that the people sitting in a room thought, well, we could just go replace Eli Manning and we'll be better, or we could just go replace Peyton Manning and we'll be better. That is just insane. I mean, there's 6 guys in the world who are great at this, and then there are 25 guys who are good at it. And, like, if you get one of those 6, you're going to have a run. And if you don't, you aren't. And it doesn't matter how much you think you know about football.
Well, and let's hang on to this parallel for a second, because I was trying to make the parallel that availability is the best ability, because you can get the rye every day, and so same as a quarterback, if the quarterback's playing, that's obviously the better thing. So, well, let's really dive deep into that analogy, because Belichick and Brady. Now, let's make the parallel to Julian Van Winkle, because he would play the Belichickian role in that scenario. Right, because, but I guess he distills the stuff too. But
is Brady the whiskey? Is that what you're saying?
I guess Brady's the whiskey, or the access to it. I'm not sure how to make the parallel, but because what Julian's number one thing was there, he had this, at least from my takeaway from the book, was this unbelievable palate that you cannot replace or recapture. So maybe he is the Brady in the whole thing, because he had the palate, like he had the magic arm.
Well,
what say you?
Well, it's interesting because, look, Bill Belichick is an innovative thinker. He is, he's as good a football coach as there's ever been. And yet, if they wouldn't have accidentally drafted one of, if not the greatest quarterback to ever live in the 6th round of a draft, he's fired a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, it's like Bill Parcells always said, you want me to make the dinner, let me shop for the ingredients,
Yeah, although it turns out you really didn't want him doing that at all.
Well, I do want to connect it back to the book a little bit too. You mentioned with the branding of sweet tea and all that, and like marketing and all. There are so many great little stories and anecdotes in the book that tell the lore of whiskey, and even you're quoting Mitten Bueller, who says, "Don't believe 90% of the tales you read on whiskey bottles, but don't forget to enjoy them either." Which I really enjoy that. You even talk about you cite him again where he's talking about how the term brand name kind of comes from the whiskey business, as it was makers would put a hot metal brand to seal their name on the top of a barrel so it could be identified, and so that's how we use brands. And then I was just giving my partner over here on the show, Matt, a little love, because he is also from the Jewish culture, and as it's also known, a lot of the famous brands like Elijah Craig, Evan Williams, created by Jewish distillers that presumed that customers didn't want to open a Rosenstein straight bourbon whiskey. It's such a subtle yet poignant observation about our American culture, and it's also telling of the Jewish culture, who seems fully content with success rather than ego. And I loved that. It's like, no, it's fine. I'll sell as much as I can. I don't need my name on it. Screw it.
Well, it's also, as the husband of Sonia Weinberg, Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Mazel Tov to you on your newborn.
I know, man. It's quite the thing. Look, I just think that, like, so often things that we think are true are just myths. And, I love the fact that Kentucky certainly identifies now as the South, but, Kentucky was not in the South in the Civil War. I mean, Kentucky was a Union state. And I just think it's so interesting and perfect that bourbon is famously made in a state that now pretends it lost a war that it actually won.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. And in those times when it was becoming the grounds for bourbon, it was considered the West.
Oh, it was as far, Kentucky was in the American imagination in this, post-Revolutionary War period what Montana is in our imagination now. Like the way we think about Montana and Idaho and the Dakotas, that's how people thought about Kentucky and Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It was the wilderness.
That's crazy.
Well, right. We could talk to you forever about whiskey and sports and everything in
Fatherhood.
between. Yeah, I do appreciate you giving us the time. I do want to let all the listeners know again, like we mentioned, you're listening to this today on December 10th. So check out the True South episode of Brownsville from Tennessee is coming out tonight on the SEC Network. You can access that via your ESPN app. And make sure you get Pappy Land, a story of family, fine bourbon, and the things that last. Wherever you get books, or do what I did because I don't read and I love listening to great stories, so you can get the audiobook on Audible and look for everything else that he's done. I mean, I really appreciate the time. Sponsored in part by Boss Coffee, which is a Japanese product. It's flash brewed. It's available only on Amazon. Comes in 3 flavors, black, vanilla, and cafe au lait. Flash brew is uniquely a Japanese process where it is brewed hot, chilled fast for optimal flavor and texture. It's ready to drink. It's canned coffee. It's the most popular canned coffee across Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, which are just right off the coast of North Carolina. It's very, very local stuff. You can go to Amazon, search Boss Coffee, and you can receive a 10% discount if you use the NCFB podcast promo code.
Yeah. And one other thing, coming soon to the Triangle Wine Company, which also has all your needs for great wine and beer and vermouth and all that kind of stuff. They are fantastic. They have 4 locations, Holly Springs, Waverly Place in Cary. They're out in Morrisville, and then even in Southern Pines. New place very soon to come in North Raleigh. Don't forget to use the NCFB promo code there also to get a nice discount.
And while you're here at the studio, we just got our new ice cream delivery from Proof Alcohol Ice Cream. We have peppermint moonshine, pumpkin pie spice, as well as all the fantastic flavors like coconut rum and bourbon caramel. Oh my God, strawberry moonshine. We are lousy with ice cream right now at the kitchen, and it is filled with 7% alcohol in every pint container. So enjoy and think differently about your dessert. Go to proofalcoholicecream.com and let them know that we sent you when you go over there and get it. They're in those fantastic branded red freezers that you can find at Triangle Wine Company, but you can also get them at a Lowe's or a Harris Teeter all across the state and even out there in South Carolina. So please support them as well. Matt, what else you got over here?
Yeah, right. Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you. I'll just give you one little caveat. You know, that 5:30 old-fashioned with the newborn and the 2 kids, so I've learned might be moved back to maybe 6:37. Just FYI.
Or 3:30.
Maybe you're moving up. There you go. Yeah. No, but in all seriousness, thanks again. We really look forward to talking to you again. And for, like Max said, all of you out there, go grab yourself a copy of Pappy Land, and you will read very merrily.
Thanks for listening to the NCF&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.